it is true that one of the outcomes of having this virus and the infection rate is that we'll probably have more head-to-head setups rather than side-by-side setups.
It gives you the arcade feel, right? Because like you have your own screen.
If you pop off, there's actually a reason to pop off, right? Because you want to stand up so you can actually see the other person over the monitor. What is the point of popping off if you're right next to each other?
Like,
sit back down. What you standing up for? All right, everyone, welcome to the show that does not have a name yet, but say hello, Kalibur.
Yo, hello, what's up, everybody?
We're here in a little battle lounge on Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, but we're not actually playing any games. We're just here to talk about games, fighting games, Japan, and stuff like that. So, Kalibur, why don't you give a quick little introduction to yourself?
Yo, name's Kalibur, living in Japan. I play fighting games. That's about it, really. I'm not that great, though. Like, yeah, I only started, like, maybe 3-4 years ago, maybe. So, quite new, but playing in Japan, there's a lot of experience. There's a lot of things that I picked up. It's, yeah, quite interesting, yeah.
And I mean, everyone, I think if this video is going up on my channel, everyone already knows who I am. But I think even though, Kalibur, you say you're not that good at the game, you're definitely many ranks above my point in fighting games. So I often look to Kalibur for a lot of advice, and also just because we're in the same sort of social space, you know, going to events in Tokyo, and I feel like your experiences and my experience they're like similar but different in many ways. So I can always use them as like a good control for like comparison and what I need to do next and what I need to do to like improve at various things.
Right,
so on that topic, I thought today we could talk about fighting game events that you can go to in real life. And that's mainly topical because right now there's a bit of a virus issue. Everyone is, you know, it's safer to obviously be at home. But before this happened, we were able to go to Tokyo and go to fighting game events. And hopefully, after the virus has cleared, we'll be able to return to them.
Yeah, like, playing fighting games in Tokyo is so good. Like, I used to live in Australia, right? Like, I played locals there. It was okay, but then I didn't feel like I got a lot out of it. But then of course, it depends where you are and how much you put in, definitely. But then just being in Tokyo, like, it was good if you played fighting games because it's just that space is so good. Like, everyone talks great about it, but then it's not like you have to be there to know like, exactly why it's so great.
So how is it? So for example, okay, first of all, what fighting games have you been playing in Tokyo since you've got to Japan?
Well, Street Fighter 5. I started like really getting into fighting games with Street Fighter 5, and then I've been playing games like Tekken and some anime fighters like there and there, but then it's just mostly Street Fighter 5. And in Japan, Street Fighter 5 is really like crazy. It's awesome.
So would you say that Street Fighter 5 is definitely like the center of you know, fighting game events that you can go to, like local events that you can go to in Japan?
Yeah, especially Japan, Street Fighter 5 is basically like the face of fighting games. Like for now, like for the last couple of years, it's quite big. There's so many events revolving around Street Fighter 5. Of course, there are, you know, like fighting events for every fighting game, but like compared to Street Fighter 5, it's just not as big. There's not enough like support, like sponsors behind like these kind of events. Yeah, exactly. And then, yeah, if you compare, like, say, Korea, they're more, like, Tekken kind of based, like, for fighting games. Obviously, they have other, you know, esports titles there as well. But I'm thinking, like, especially for esports in Japan, like, fighting games is quite up there. Like, you don't really hear a lot about, like, shooters or stuff,
That's
like, in
true.
Japan. So,
Would you
like,
say that maybe Japan's kind of in a unique situation then? Because esports has come to Japan when really Japan probably... Fighting games are probably the strongest genre for esports in this country, whereas probably when esports hit the States and when it hit Korea, maybe the first-person shooters and the StarCrafts and the League of Legends games were maybe ahead of the game in a way.
Yeah, I mean, in the arcades, like, Japan really loves their fighting games. Like, how do I say? Yeah, like, compared to other countries, like, yeah, they're not as big, and obviously everyone had consoles, you know, at home, and, you know, PCs, you know, there. That's why, you know, it's a lot easier to get into these other types of games. But then esports, yeah, Japan didn't really experience esports, like, until later, you know? Yeah. Sorry, what was the question? I just blurted out.
No, I mean, we're just still talking about genres and all this and esports.
Definitely for sure, like, yeah. fighting games is definitely like a more like popular in Japan for sure. Yeah, compared to other countries. But then, as terms of like other fighting, like other esports genres, not as much, right? I don't know. Yeah.
When I see the esports magazines that are on the shelves at like the bookstores in Japan, it's always fighting game players that I see on the magazine covers. It's almost like if anyone's going to recognize anyone, it's going to be a fighting game player, as opposed to probably other esports where it's like they get much bigger numbers for things like League of Legends and Overwatch and or basically any other genre of game, basically.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, because the very first like pro gamer, right, was Daigo.
That's true.
And he was a fighting gamer. Yeah, he was a fighting gamer. So therefore, like,
He's in the Guinness World Book of
if
Records.
anything, yeah, exactly, Guinness Book, and yeah, he was the first pro gamer. Like esports pro gaming wasn't really like heard of in Japan for a while. Like Korea was one of the first, right? I think Korea, it's a household name, right?
Right.
If I recall, yeah.
Well, so going back to local events in Japan, like places that you can go to play video games in general. Well, like when you think about it, Japan started off with the arcades, obviously, and then they also had, home consoles. So they really grew both game centers and home consoles at the same time. But the arcades haven't actually died. Now, fighting games are definitely dying out in the arcades in Japan, but you can still go and you can take those little pictures, purikura, and like make little stickers with your friends. And there's still those claw grabber machines. Like arcades are still plentiful in Japan, but just maybe fighting games aren't really there anymore. But
for sure,
I feel like Japan, especially when people think about leaving the house to go and play a video game, fighting games is still where it's at. Because when I was at the Red Bull Gaming Sphere, which is where Kalibur, you also show up there as well. People I met there, they often said like, well, they used to play first-person shooter games, but there are no events that you can go and meet new people and make friends and play the game, and so that's why they switched to Street Fighter V.
Yeah, that's definitely why. Like, I think fighting games is definitely a social game for sure. Like compared to other games, like sure you can play shooters, you can have teams and stuff, but at the end of the day, you're just gonna find a new team every single time you hit new game or matchmaking, right? Yeah.
So one thing I have seen when I was, back, sometimes when I go back to the UK, I see these like, I don't know if they're called GameStops or Game, I can't remember which franchise it is, but some of these places have like places with 5 or 6 computers lined up. So you can show up and you can do these PC-based games like Overwatch or League of Legends, and they have like little tournaments and stuff that they run there. But I've never seen anything like that in Japan. I mean, actually, I think I've seen some of the PC shops. They have setups for it, but I've never seen it like in quite the same way.
Yeah, like just a whole lot of setups playing the same type of games.
I mean, again, I'm not really familiar with it, but I assume that they have a bunch of these in Korea, like gaming arcades with PC setups where you can show up with 5 of your friends and play like a team match. I see.
Yeah, definitely. What do they have it? It's called with like PC Bang, I think, is in Korea for sure. Like the PC cafe stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. Like Japan kind of has it, but not really for like at the style like other places, right? Like what you're explaining, like having like just everyone, like a whole bunch of friends come together to play. It's more like we have like what was it, kisatens, or was it not kisatens,
Cafes,
like manga cafes and stuff. Yeah, you go, you can play games there, but like you can't play them as a group. It's a more individual, more quiet, because like they force you to be quiet. You can't be loud. Yeah.
Oh right, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So again, it's not I can't really talk about the West and Korea, but definitely from what we've seen here in Japan, definitely like if you want to leave the house to play fighting games, your options really are to go to a game center and try and find arcade versions of games. For example, for the first 3 years we didn't have an arcade version of Street Fighter V. It was just on home console. And if you went to the arcades, you were basically playing Guilty Gear Xrd Rev 2 or Central Fiction or any of the games that previously had arcade versions. And if you didn't want to go to a game center and play, then you would have to go to these local events. And I think the main one in Tokyo definitely is this Red Bull gaming sphere, because they've got events every single day of the week.
Yeah. That's the thing though, like when I came to Japan, like Red Bull just started like a couple of months before. So it wasn't even that, long. It's yeah.
It's true, actually. So the party that we went to recently was the Red Bull Gaming Sphere anniversary party. Was that the second year?
Second. It was a second. Yeah.
So it's only
exactly.
just passed like a couple months ago, the second anniversary of existing.
Exactly.
But in addition to that, in Tokyo, I mean, actually, most of you probably already know, but if you follow on Twitter, there's a guy called Doc Fugu, and he's always posting like every week what events you can go to play fighting games. But it seems like the
shout
main
outs to Doc.
yeah, big shout out.
Sorry.
And the main places that you can go to are Red Bull Gaming Sphere, which have events like every single day. Shot Bar Lucy, which is in Ochanomizu, which is one stop away from Akihabara. And then the other places are like Akihabara Esports Square. So this place is on the west side and the east side that you can go to. I think those ones are the main ones, but then of course there's plenty of other small things going on as well. I say plenty. There's a few other things going on.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I think nowadays, I think Shop Bar Lucy was definitely one of the last locals that were like right now, from now, like these current events because of the virus. Yeah. But only like real recently that they have been forced to shut down.
Right.
I mean, they've been trying hard to keep it up, but like, it's just.
Well, Shop Bar Lucy, can kind of get away with it because it's small, right? Even if 1,000 people showed up and said, we all want to go to Shop Bar Lucy tonight, it's like, well, we can't let you in because it's just, that little bar can fit maybe, I don't know, 15 to 20 people in it maximum.
Pretty much, yeah. There's only like, what, eight setups, I think? But that space is quite like a little bit on the smallish side, yeah.
So you're telling me, so Shop Bar Lucy's also shut down as a result of this virus?
They said they'll shut down like big events, like when they do their fighting game events. But as an establishment, they're still allowed to be open because there's technically a bar,
right?
Still,
right.
So they're not like completely shut down for now, I think.
Yeah.
But who knows? That might change in the future.
I think that probably will change. Red Bull Gaming Sphere definitely was the first one to cancel events and basically say we're not open for business.
The very first one, and then it was like.
But how many people do you think
like,
show
what's
up
going on?
For example, talking about local fighting game events for Street Fighter V, basically. So every day they've got a different event. So like Mondays was, I don't know. What was Monday? So let's imagine it was Smash. Tuesdays was
I think it was Smash,
Tekken and Dragon Ball and Soul Calibur, and then Wednesdays sometimes was BB Tag and Under Night in Birth, and then Thursdays was always Street Fighter, but sometimes it was other days, and then there was Grand Blue on another day. So that's kind of this general schedule that we were running. But how many people do you think showed up every week for the Street Fighter V event? On average.
5. Oh, damn.
5?
On average? Damn, we're talking like... Oh, no, yeah. Sorry. I mean,
you mean 5 people? You meant Street Fighter 5.
On the Thursday... I mean, on the Thursday one? We're talking like hundreds. Like, well, not hundreds, like 100.
There was
like
at least
80 to 100. Like, basically,
80 to 100 people.
you'd see the little paper where you write your name and stuff. Log in, like, sign in your name. Yeah, I think that page goes up to like you log in
offline events and you're logging in.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm still thinking online because this whole thing is
this whole virus. You don't exist offline anymore.
Exactly.
You're gonna show up to your friend's house. Hey, is Kalibur in so we can play? I've come to log in. That's fine. Just log in here.
All right. I'm good. I'm gonna sign out now. Bye. Bye.
I'm signing out now. I'm going home. Oh,
yeah.
Man. We've gone.
I think a
digital.
single page would have been like 100 people, and I think it would be full most of the time, like, or at least average. Yeah. So
one of the most impressive things I found about the Red Bull event, and again, I have no experience going to local events outside of Japan, was how many new people were always showing up. And maybe that's just because I was always sitting in the beginner area, but I rarely... There's, every now and then there's 1 or 2 people who would stick around, and so you'd see them another few weeks later. But I felt like every week I went, there was just like a whole bunch of new people I had never seen before. And it was almost every single week that you'd see at least 3 or 4 new faces.
Yeah, I mean, for Japan, right? Like, they really like fighting games. It's like, it's such they've created such a space where it's just easy to get into, right? Especially because with a face like Red Bull, right? Red Bull is like, Red Bull is Red Bull. Like, it's not scary. It's not like some random like some group.
It's not a CD bar somewhere that no one's ever
it's not
heard
a CD
of.
bar somewhere. It's not like some really like Weibo or like title. It's just Red Bull Gaming Sphere level like what's it called, Level Up Thursdays or something like that. It's like and then we've got beginner spaces, and that's all you need to hear, and they're like, okay, I'll give it a try.
Yeah, massive shout out to Red Bull because I think they've handled it incredibly well. I don't even know how they run the events. I'm pretty sure that they're volunteer based by the people who want to run an event. But you have to like just borrow and rent the space from Red Bull to do it. But they give it easy titles that are easy to understand. They most if possible, a lot of the events do streams every time they do the event. And for every event, every single event that I've been to at Red Bull, there's always a sign that says beginners here, intermediate here, advanced over there. It's like at least you know where to go to not get beaten up by the pros. I think that's really important if you're like getting new people into the scene. You're trying to increase the number of people playing these games, right?
Yeah, that is true. But then, for Street Fighter V especially, because there's like such a huge player base, it's so easy to split them up. If we're talking like other games like BB Tag and stuff, it's harder to separate. It's harder to find beginners and stuff. It's harder to because you remember the time we went to the BB Tag one? It was just us two.
Yeah. Yeah, that was like,
everyone else was
intermediate. Yeah.
Yeah. So it definitely depends on the game, but sure. But like, luckily, like Street Fighter V is just so like popular, like here for sure. But then, obviously, when people start getting more into Street Fighter V, they're gonna start wondering, hey, I wonder what these other games are like, and then they're gonna try them out. But then,
All right. So, for example, anyone who's maybe at home that's never been to a fighting game event before, or even if you have been to one, you've never been to one in Japan. Kalibur, why don't you like give a vague description, a general overview of what it's like to show up at an event at Red Bull, for example, and what it's like?
Okay, well, the first time I went there, it was quite like I came there exactly at 6 when it opened.
Well,
so
start with how you found out about it. How did you find out about it as well?
Ooh, I think I just Googled
places to go.
Like I think Kakuge Checker. I think like there's this website in Japan, like they have list out every single event for fighting games, and then Red Bull just came out a lot. I was like, okay, Red Bull, okay, and then
this
like
is clearly the place.
And then just look it up. It's like, Red Bull Gaming Sphere, and then they have a map and everything. You just go there. It's like, okay, cool, and then they also have like they do really great. Their timetables look so nice as well. Like, so it's like, Thursdays, okay, Street Fighter V, okay, I'll give it a shot, and then after work you go there, because I'm the type who always goes there at the start, so it's just like it's just easier because everyone's setting up, and then if there's anyone to help you, they'll be there, just like right there, like to help you out.
Right.
Yeah.
So what did you? Well, who was the first person you ever spoke to at a fighting event? Because I think for most people, it's not really the game that's scary. It's for many people, it is just showing up, and it's like, what if I don't know who to talk to and what to do when I arrive? What if everyone's friends with each other?
That is true. Like, but that's like kind of similar to a lot of like social like gatherings. It's no different. Like exactly. So it's no difference exactly. So
except that this one you have everyone has something in common that's not alcohol and it's not trying to hook up with other people.
Yeah. If you come in expecting welcome arms, it's like you're gonna have a little hard time because people are different. Like there's no like if you're a fighting game player at an event, you're automatically welcoming. No. It really depends on if you're feeling welcoming at the time, or if someone's more outreaching, or if like the new person's more talkative. It's really like if you want to like up your chances, it's better if you are the one to like initiate and stuff for sure.
Yeah.
That said, because like I don't speak super fluent Japanese. Like especially when you're sitting next to someone who speaks like Japanese fighting game jargon and stuff.
That's like, right, because there's normal Japanese and then there's people who play fighting games and they've got really casual Japanese. You've got to really learn how they speak.
You gotta play some sets and then they gotta say something and you're like, whoa.
Yeah. Though for most Japanese people I've spoken to, like once they figure out that maybe you're foreign or that your Japanese isn't super hardcore fighting game Japanese, then they kind of like simplify their Japanese so that you understand what they're saying.
True. Yeah. It also, it really depends on who you're talking to. But then I'd like to say that, Japanese people do like to consider the other person, and they definitely do want to, like, yeah.
And if they don't want to talk to you, then, they'll get up and they'll go somewhere else and they won't approach you again.
They'll be like, thanks for the matches, and then gonna go, bye, kind of thing.
I'm gonna go find someone who knows how to play the game.
Yeah,
it does happen sometimes.
But that said, the first person who I spoke to during those locals was a guy who spoke both English and Japanese fluently. So I was kind of lucky though.
or
Yeah. I think if you don't know Nakamura, I think if you
oh,
don't know
that's
who
right. Yeah, no, there's a really
yeah.
helpful member of the community at Red Bull who is fluent in both languages, but totally bilingual. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he was
He
there
doesn't
actually
show
the
up
first
in,
time
like,
I went
these
to the
days.
SF5 local as well.
Yeah. But having him around was really nice. And then from there, like, it was easy to meet with other people as well. Like, yeah, especially with beginners, we're all like learning. So like everyone just like, yeah, I kind of suck, but
Yeah.
let's suck together kind of feeling. Yeah.
That's such a weird phrase.
Yeah, I mean that's
Let's
how
suck
it is.
together.
Like you see
Let's
a lot
what
of people
together?
like talking. Like, it's
No,
like
no, I know what
yeah,
you
they
mean.
like to like, oh man.
No,
Like,
well,
oh, this
something
game is so
before you
hard, yeah.
continue, I just want something I want to reiterate.
Sorry.
Something I want to totally agree with as well as what you just said about the fact that it's not like everyone's just sitting there waiting for you to come so that they can welcome you with a big hug and say, "Hey, welcome to the community," because it's not like your first day at university. Because when you show up at university, I think everyone's expecting, because of the word community, I think it's a little bit misleading. Everyone thinks that when you show up, they're going to have their arms open. They're like, hey, come and join the football club. Hey, come and join the art club. Hey, we've got comic book society over here. It's not like everyone is begging you to come and become part of their friends circle. And especially in Japan, which is like quite close-knit. People have like 4 or 5 friends and they don't really spread out too much further than that in general, I find. So as long as you already understand that from the start, then you know that, okay, when I go here, I'm not being ignored. People aren't ignoring me on purpose. It's just, that's not what the point of this is. This is a place with fighting game machines set up. We're going to play some matches, and undoubtedly, play enough matches, you're going to make some friends.
Yeah. Like everyone says, like, we need more people playing fighting games. Like even Japanese would agree, like, we just need more people to play fighting games. The more the better, right? But at the same time, being welcoming requires a different level of skill, which is social skills. Right? You can have fighting game skills, but social, like, they're not the same.
No,
Definitely.
No, the
being
people
high
that you would
level
choose
doesn't
to
make
be the people that you would choose to like get more people to join your like fraternities or your societies at university, that's a very different kind of person. Not every single person who plays fighting games can be like that or is like that. So it's not it's not the same. But people will open up if you give them a chance, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
So for example, your first experience, you spoke to this dude who happened to be bilingual, which is nice. And where did it go from there? From like that first day, that first experience?
Yeah, it was good. We talked a lot. Like, luckily, he was the one who talked more. If you know what I'm talking about.
He's a knowledgeable person. He's got
was very
lots to
knowledgeable,
say about
like,
every topic, which is
definitely
great. Yeah.
he definitely made you feel like it good because he just kept talking and it was a lot of like definitely you were like part of something. And then at that time I was quite I was just testing the waters at that day because it was my first time. I didn't stay the whole time. I maybe stayed like a couple hours and then I went. I asked him, I was like, yeah, how long you gonna stay here? I was like, oh, I stay here the whole like until closing. I was like, oh wow, damn, okay. And then if it like slowly eventually I became like that too. I decided I wanted to oh yeah, you know what? I can get home at this hour. I might as well just stay the whole thing. Yeah. And I got work the next day, but I can make home at like midnight and stuff. It's
once a week, so it's like worth the sacrifice.
Yeah, definitely, yeah, exactly. That's true. And it was that place was nice. It was a good it was nice to meet people, nice to play games for sure. Like I'm the kind of person who wants to like get better, so it's like I definitely wanted to play as many games as I wanted to. James was there, if I think
right, another one of our friends,
the other friends there definitely like you'd find foreigners there as well, and you kind of bond way easier because that when you meet other foreigners it's just so easy because we're both lonely, like alone.
That's a good point for people who haven't been to a fighting game event in Japan as well, is that actually quite a lot of these events there are other foreigners there. So even if you can't tell if a person's a foreigner, especially in Japan, they've got like Japanese people, Korean people, Filipino people, Chinese people, and you can't always tell which people the foreigners are. But if you hear someone speaking and you think like, okay, this person might be a foreigner, then it's worth asking them, hey, do you speak English well? Like, can I speak to you because I need somewhere to start?
exactly. Yeah, that's true. It's exactly how it is like in other like circles. Like if you go to university, if you go to classes, like oh hey that guy is might be the same
Yeah, like from the same
position as
hometown
me
as you or
know?
something like that.
Yeah. I know one friend who I met in university who hated it because once people found out what nationality he was, and then everyone of the same nationality wanted to cling to him. Like he didn't like that, but like okay, yeah, I understand what you mean. Yeah, for sure.
No, that can sometimes be a burden, especially I went to a school in London, and definitely I think there were people who were from Japan who came to be part of the London, society, part of society in London.
Yeah.
And then other people who were like, okay, I understand that Japanese people like to huddle together and they feel safer when they're around other Japanese people, but that's not why I'm here. So please don't like overwhelm me with Japanese people because that's not why I'm here.
Yeah,
So it can go the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and definitely that's definitely true with a lot of foreigners. There's a lot of foreigners who are in Japan because they're sick and tired of their home countries and they don't want to speak English ever again. They just want to be Japanese. They want to nationalize and change over to be Japanese as soon as possible. And that's fine. But you gotta figure these things out early with people so you don't end up so they don't feel harassed by you.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. Yeah.
But yeah, so let me ask you about games then. So you've arrived. You've spoken to someone, you're already starting to feel like this is a place where you belong. How do you approach playing a game with someone?
Well, you just find a spot and just ask, I think. I don't know how it is.
For people who can't visualize it because they've never seen what it looks like in Japan.
I see what you mean.
What is the process by which you're like, okay, I want to play a game. What do I do now?
That is true. Like I understand. I exactly know what you mean because when you go there, it's quite hard to feel it out because there's no line. There's no actual system. Even though like I did complain one time, it was like there's no system, but then that kind of just been like, yeah, who cares? Okay,
it's because
fine,
it's like grassroots. It actually does work out. It's just that for complete newcomers, there's a very high chance that they won't know what's going on and they're just going to walk away and go home.
Well, yeah, coming from like arcades, right? Obviously, there was a system, right? You put your quarter down, and you had kind of like you have an actual order.
That's right. There's no money now, so we don't know who plays next.
There's no money. Like it's like it's free to play, so there's a lot of like you just line up wherever you feel like. Example, you say a lineup of setups, and people would just sit behind whichever setup they kind of wanted to play around. It didn't matter who you fought against. You just picked a spot, and then definitely when someone gets up you basically try to feel like, oh, was that person who was standing next to me waiting before me? You kind of have to like figure that out. Like if they don't move or whatever, that means, oh, maybe he didn't, or so then you just sit down. Right. There's a lot of like you gotta read the room. It's such a Japanese
complications
thing,
for sure. There's complications, but in the most simplistic way possible. Let's say that someone who's only ever played Street Fighter V online at home and has gone like, okay, I'm gonna make the jump. I'm showing up to Red Bull next week. What do I do to get a game with someone?
Yeah. Well, if you see a spot open, you just sit down. Like that's kind of like the on paper kind of like straightforward way of saying it.
Okay.
If there's a spot, if there's like no one setting, there's a setup with nobody on it. You could sit down there and then wait for someone to come to you. That's also a quite an easy way to figure things out.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably a good point. Is that these setups? So if anyone who's never been to an event before, there's usually a monitor, a PlayStation, and 2 chairs. And at some of these setups, both chairs are empty. And some of these setups, both chairs are full. And other setups, one chair is full and one chair is empty. So I feel like for anyone who doesn't know what to expect, this is the situation where you go to the empty seat and you say to the person in the other seat, like, do you want to play? Or if there's no one on either seat, you just sit in one and you just kind of wait.
Pretty much, yeah. I've done all of those things. Yeah, I've sat down, hit up training mode, and waited for someone to come to me, and they'll be like, "You want to play a match?" He's like, "Yeah, okay, let's go." And then I see someone playing like on training mode. I'll come to them. It's like, "Yo, you want to play a match?" And then it'll be like, "Yeah, of course." Like they can't say no. Like that's not what they came here from. Like, yeah, can you imagine coming all the way to a local just to hit training mode and then refuse people?
Yeah, no one has ever said no to me. I have to.
No one has ever said
I think that's a really important point to put out there. Like I've never ever had a person go, you know what? Actually, I'm kind of busy right now in training mode, so can you come back later?
Although I do get the feeling like because like other locals outside of Japan might be like that, like they can refuse people.
Okay, that's
I've
fine.
heard,
But this is we're dealing with like a language barrier as well, so
Yeah,
I think it's unlikely in Japan.
True. Like, yeah, I have like wasn't that people could refuse because because there's just less players and mostly like the majority of players are in there are like more like high level, like because we're
Are you
talking
talking
about
in
like
the
just
West?
yeah, we're West, right? Like just sitting down and wanting a match, right? And people be like, "Nah, I don't want to play with you," kind of thing.
Really, I've actually never heard of that happening, but I can imagine
he's-
it. I can imagine it. Maybe if it's like I've only got 2 hours tonight because I work like 6 different jobs, and I really only want to play people who are strong. I mean, I can see it. I can see it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's really conducive to increasing making the community bigger, but I can understand why a person might be in a situation like that.
Yeah, luckily Japan isn't like that because one, it's the player base is big enough where they can actually separate. So usually, yeah, you wouldn't go challenging like high level people anyways. Like even if they did, like they would just like finish the match super fast, and then you get forced out anyways.
Yeah,
and then
And the other thing, on top of the fact that, like exactly what you say, in Japan, the player base is large enough that they can separate. The second thing on top of that is there are separate events for players who are stronger.
Right.
I think that
That
really
is
helps as well. So for people who've never been to Japan to play in a fighting game event, there's you can go to Red Bull, which has a beginner zone, an advanced zone, and a sort of master level zone. But then on top of that, you could just not go to Red Bull. You could show up at Momochi's. I don't know if it's his house, but he's got his own studio. And people who play there, like they're like gold level and up only, really. And like depending on the atmosphere of each event, like there are some places where you just wouldn't even show up if you were under gold rank in Street Fighter V and stuff like that.
Yeah, pretty much. Like there are events where you can tell, like, yeah, this is like where the high levels train, or this is where they get their most training time because only this certain level show up. But like it might have not been like that on purpose, but it just became like that. Like say Esports Square is definitely a place where it's the high level like players are more than common than the low levels. Like I like Red Bull. I feel like it's more like an even spread. Like for that one as well.
With local events, I feel like this is definitely one of the biggest tensions happening in the scene right now. Is that it started completely grassroots, right? People just hanging out at each other's houses. I happen to have a Street Fighter Alpha 3 PCB that we can play an arcade game at my house, and so everyone shows up there, and that becomes like a local scene, for example. But now that esports is becoming a thing and it's monetizable, and big companies like Red Bull showing up, and like what we were just saying at the very beginning of this, I don't know if this is a podcast. At the beginning of this discussion. It's like, there's no line, so we don't know who gets to play next, and it's just not organized. And so half of it is like, we want it to be organized so that more people can come in, play, and feel welcome. But at the same time, we don't want it to become too organized. Otherwise, it loses that feeling of being grassroots. So I feel like that's like one of the biggest difficulties right now for a community that's trying to get larger.
But then I don't know, like if Japan really thinks like being grassroots or not is a problem, though. I don't know. Like,
I don't know if they're like considering it as a problem, but for example, like the main, I think the main place that it's manifested itself like as news is the fact that Momochi didn't want a pro license. Like he's got the pro license now, but he spent 2 years, right, or maybe more, not making the same money that other people could be making. He kept winning tournaments, and in some cases he was getting some of the money, and in most cases he was not getting very much of the money at all. And it was because he was not really down. I mean, I don't want to go into detail because there's too many details to go into right now to get it all accurate. But it was definitely like, hey, we grew this thing ourselves for the past like 3 decades, and now someone who's unrelated to fighting games, a large number of people who are unrelated to fighting games, are making all the rules and deciding who can make money off this game and who can't, and why aren't we being more included in the decisions. So I think that's the most public place that this has become obvious as a larger issue.
Right. Yeah, definitely when you get when you're Momochi, he has like such an influence in the scene. Yeah, definitely when companies start waving their arms around, like it definitely it is quite annoying for them. But True. But then going back to like, events for like smaller people, like, beginners and stuff, I don't think that it matters too much, right? Like they just need a space where they want to get better and, just
Absolutely.
enjoy the game and stuff like as well.
Yeah.
So,
I guess the main
yeah,
thing is that we've seen like fighting games grow slowly and sometimes have little bursts over the past few decades. And what would be scary would be if esports comes in and says, okay, we're going to throw loads of money in and it's going to be amazing. And if it doesn't return on the investment, then everybody pulls out. And that's why, I think that's why we keep seeing like teams are disbanding and, sponsorship is being taken away. And it's like, well, it's all nice and good if the money comes in, but if they're not in it with us for the long haul, then we could be left worse off when all the companies like pull the support than when we were at the start if we had just kept going with the whole grassroots thing. So, I mean, I don't have the answers, but that's just what it seems like from the outside as a YouTuber, basically. That's what it looks like from what I see.
Sure, there is, a lot of teams being formed and broken. Yeah, it's quite sad to see. Yeah, like that's why I feel like a lot of groups have been like wary about like sponsor stuff. Like, they hate esports because of stuff like this might happen in the first place.
I think
right?
with good reason. I think
it's like, I don't want to take your money. Yeah. It's a risk. Like fighting games have become quite niche and people don't believe that it's going to hit that level of like, first-person shooters kind of level or
MOBA? Yeah.
Right.
MOBA,
Yeah.
MOBA.
MOBAs, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking MOBAs, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Well, I guess this leads on to another topic that we don't really have time to completely cover today. But it's like, what about the future of these local events? Because whether we like it or not, this COVID virus, which is cancelling most local events and has also cancelled most of the offline events, there is the risk that some of these events, because they weren't given enough time, because they didn't know that this virus was going to be a thing, it's very possible that a lot of events won't be happening next year or ever again because of just the massive money loss that happened as a result of all the issues in 2020. So there's the fact that those a lot of events may be disappearing, but then also the fact that this virus, even if we get past the apex of people, of the death toll and the infection rates, it's still 6 months to a year before we've got a vaccine. So that's like a year that it's still a risk being out in public, because if you catch it, it's still not a disease that has a cure yet or a vaccine.
Yeah, like they say, like the vaccine will be like, if anything, ready by next year, which is quite a while. So it's gonna be.
And plus, they're rushing the testing as well. It's like usually they would do animal testing and then they would do human testing, and I think this is like unprecedented. They're like, we need to just jump straight to human trials. Let's go. Yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah, exactly. And next year, early next year is like the fast one. It would take longer normally, right? Yeah, so that's kind of. Yeah.
So in the interim, it seems like the main things that's going to happen is that we're going to see lots of people doing online tournaments and like online sort of locals, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. Going back to your thing, like what happens if after all this is over? Like I think, I know some like it's gonna. Weeklies are going to be okay. I think weeklies are going to be okay because, like, all they're going to do is just rent out space and stuff. But when it comes to big events, we're talking like, I think I saw on Twitter, like, what, KVC? I can't remember what KVC stands for. But, like, because they're like, it's a big event, they put a lot of investment in, like, equipment, space.
You're talking about an event in Japan, like
event. Yeah, this is an event in Japan. Because it's a much larger event. It's like a one-time event or something like that. Yeah. And because of this whole virus thing, like, they're going to lose a lot of money. So definitely their future is going to be more questionable than, like, say, Red Bull Gaming Sphere. They're going to, like, I think Red Bull's stuff like that, weeklies are going to be okay. Because
right, exactly. This event...
The investment level,
not being able to run locals doesn't kill the company Red Bull, because their main business is selling energy drinks, and they can continue to do that, I assume, whether or not fighting game local events are allowed to happen.
Yeah. And then even like events like, that run in Red Bull, like, like they just had to put money into renting out space. Like they're going to be fine because they borrow all the equipment and stuff like that. Local weeklies in arcades, though, that's going to be a little bit tricky because, some arcades are definitely under the, like, gonna suffer a lot from this because their business is going down and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So
and in many cases, the governor will probably say, if you're an arcade or if you're an izakaya, like a bar or a nightclub, you're not allowed to run because you're you're the type of place that invites too many people who are going to be close together and talking. And apparently talking is another one of the big ones. They're saying, just simply speaking to people at close proximity, that can cause a lot of spray and spread of the virus.
It does. If you haven't seen like that science video where the guy just talks and like gets the little like the camera with the slow mo, it's exactly what it like. It is true. Talking does release a lot of like microparticles and stuff. Yeah, and there's a lot of arcade based like locals which are suffering. Like TRF I know is one. Even was it?
And anyone who doesn't know what TRF is, TRF is like a little mini arcade in Nakano, West Side.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, thanks for that, by the way.
That's right.
So, and then a popular one is Mikado, which is a big place for like Guilty Gear and like a lot of like retro games.
Super famous.
Definitely, might suffer a lot.
Because these places are based on the fact that a lot of machines are huddled very closely together, and people are playing these games in close proximity. If there's any place that's going to be able to get through this and continue to run events, it will be places that can change the use of their space. So a small bar like Shot Bar Lucy can just limit the number of people who are allowed in. Places like Red Bull, they can reset up the chairs so that everyone is always 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet apart when they're playing. Stuff like that. There are ways to create setups. Plus, and it's terrible to say like we're looking for advantages as a result of this situation, but it is true. It is true that one of the outcomes of having this virus and the infection rate is that we'll probably have more head-to-head setups rather than side-by-side setup.
Yeah.
And that's personal preference. A lot of people prefer the side-by-side setup because it's more personal and feels a little more close-knit. But, I think the head-to-head setup, I quite like the idea of the head-to-head setup. It's just a hangover from Japanese.
It gives you the arcade feel, right? Because like you have your own screen for sure. Yeah.
But I just love like if you pop off, there's actually a reason to pop off, right? Because you want to stand up so you can actually see the other person over the monitor. What is the point of popping off if you're right next to each other?
That's
you
true.
should just
Like,
sit back down. They're still sitting down. What's she standing up for?
No.
The beads. We should probably close it up, but essentially, if fighting game events are able to continue, then I think it'll be the places like Red Bull and Shot Bar Lucy in Japan. And today we've spoken briefly, for anyone who doesn't know what the events were like, that's, we've spoken briefly about what they were like before they got cancelled. But I guess the big question now is, what is the future for these events, and how involved are we going to be online for these events? What do you think? Closing remarks.
Yeah, like definitely, like Japan right now is definitely working on the online scene for now, like because they gotta do something. Yeah. So, but then once this is over, I feel like they'll either struggle to get back to where they were, or this this pent up energy of I want like locals back. That motivation might actually boost them
I see what you
nothing.
mean. Like a rebound. It's going to rebound and come back twice as strong.
Be like, yeah, we're finally out, let's get fired up, kind of thing.
Well,
that's one of the things,
I'm very much up for that.
Hopefully that will happen. I really want that to happen.
That would,
for sure.
Well, and this is the thing, is if we could definitely be a part of it, because it is such a small scene, that even just a couple people like you and I, we could show up, because we show up most weeks to these events. If we wanted to be part of really doubling the numbers at an event like this, we could easily be part of that. So let's hope that the situation does blow over.
Having skills outside of just fighting games is so helpful, like when you're part of a community, because you can be useful in so many different ways. You just have to be willing to help.
That's so true.
When people ask me like, oh, how should I help out in a community? Well, the first thing is just be there. Like that's the bare minimum, and it helps quite actually. It surprisingly works a lot. Like just being there.
That's so true. Yeah, and one of the people that we speak to frequently about this stuff is like Doc Fugu, right? And I know that Doc Fugu likes to show up to Akihabara Esports Square mostly because they have beer. and it's like, but that's a really important thing, is like we've got people who are programmers, we've got people who are entertainers, we've got people who literally just play video games and they're students, we've got people who probably go home and do web design. There's so many skills that are on the table, but no one knows about them, because the only skill you can really show is that you're a bronze player or that you're a silver player when you're playing the game. But there's so many skills being attracted to these events. And like we were saying, Red Bull has over 100 people at least at events like Street Fighter V every week. So imagine if everyone actually knew what everyone could do and what we could accomplish if we pulled those skills together.
Yeah.
My big question is, before we go, what do you think? How do you think this is going to affect netcode? All right, that's all we've got time for on this.
Cut it now.
Let's just cut it there, because that's gonna put some fire in the comments. But I think it's a big question. That's what I want to know. How's this going to affect the way that Japanese companies start approaching netcode development in their games? Because we still have some new games coming out. We got the League of Legends fighting game coming out soon. Guilty Gear Strive was changed. Like the next beta is actually going to be run. Ooh. The online test is going to be run with delayed netcode, but then when they release the game, it's going to have rollback.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious to see. And then Street Fighter, they've been fixing, and as far as I'm aware, they have been doing many big changes to the matchmaking and the netcode. With varying results, but at least they are working on it.
They're trying. They're trying.
And so those are like two of the biggest companies. We've got Capcom and we've got Arc System. And of like the big three, who else are we waiting for? We're waiting for Namco, really. So we've already got 2 out of 3 of the biggest 3 in this business, and they're already working on rollback netcode. So it's like, if online is going to be a big part of locals, in inverted commas, then this is probably the future. Is probably more reliable netcode for these games. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I really can't wait to see how Guilty Gear turns out, because that might define the future of how games are going to be done in the
God, that's the risk, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like all the money is on Guilty Gear right now.
It's an awful analogy to make, but it's a bit like the early cures that people were coming up with for coronavirus. They're like, we found the cure. We found the cure. It's like, well,
what?
Yeah, but we have no idea if that person was just self-healing or not. Like, they took this medicine, but at the same time, that person was probably already going to get better just on their own.
Yeah.
So with Guilty Gear, we have no idea if the game fails. Was it because the game was simplified, or was it because they took a chance on the netcode? And you can be sure that the netcode will be what's to blame if the game doesn't succeed, right? So it's really important that Guilty Gear succeeds, even if the game sucks. Everybody buy it. Let's just play it.
Yeah, buy it. Just buy it, play it, and hopefully
for the good of netcode everywhere. Anyway, that's all I think we've got time for. Anything else you'd like to add, Kalibur?
Yeah. Well, if this is going up, definitely I want. Yeah, what do people want to ask, or what they think about this, or if anything, they have any questions for you specifically or us, we can talk about if we ever do this again.
If we ever do this again, you have no idea. But I think this has been fun. Yeah. So if anyone's got any ideas for topics that you'd like to hear us talk about, again, we're not the highest level players in these games, but we do live in Japan, do go to events in Tokyo, and we are playing. I think we've played most of all the new fighting games that have come out. So we've got vague opinions on all of them. So any topics you'd like to suggest, do put them in the comments below. Kalibur, why don't you tell them where they can find you?
They'll find me on Twitch, twitch.tv/KaliburVS. That's all I do. That's all I have. And then Twitter, I think Twitter's the same handle. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And if you want to talk to either of us, you can also pop onto the NihongoGamer Discord. We're both on there frequently. Yeah, and often running battle lounges, games like this, like Grand Blue Fantasy Versus. Man, if there's a game that I want rollback on, it's definitely this one.
Oh god, yeah.
I would appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, where do I begin? Okay,
where do we begin?
Wait.
That's all for now. Everyone, don't forget to comment and subscribe. Check out Kalibur's channels, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Yep, bye.